See, I'm going to be reading from Bran Hambric, The Farfield Curse. I'm not reading the ending. I'm reading the prologue and the first chapter. In the prologue, hold on, let me put my mic. The night was cold and dead, and so felt Clarence's heart. He dashed through the darkness, never stopping, always watchful for the men, every passing car making him leap back into the shadows of the trees lining the abandoned rural highway. His form was hardly more than a shadow, sweating even in the chilling cold, his face bruised and scarred. With every second that passed, he knew they were coming, and with every step, he knew they were gaining on him. He darted through the mist and onto a side street with no houses or people, lined with thick walls of rock on both sides. His eyes swept the road, watchful for the lights of police cars or of the vans he knew were following him. He was worn from a night of running, but he couldn't stop. He had to get to the city before they found him, or worse, before they found Bran. Suddenly there was a burst of light behind him, coming over the hill. He spun and his eyes flashed, the noise startling him for a second, but only a second, as he heard the engine roar and he saw the shape of a black van rushing after him. "No," he gasped, and he took off in the other direction, hearing the van blast in pursuit. The road was cut through the rocks, and the rising walls blocked him from going into the woods. His shadow was thrown ahead of him, the headlights burning the sweat on his neck. He ran faster, panting for breath, his heart pounding and his feet slapping against the pavement. Ahead of him there was a flash of motion, a squeal of tires, and a second black van shot out of the shadows, skidding and coming from the other direction. He shouted and turned to run the other way, stopping and spinning back as the first van slid after him, blocking his escape as the other cornered him in. Clarence ran to the wall of rock, digging his fingers into the cracks to climb, to find any way to escape, but falling to the pavement when he found he could not. The van stood still in foreboding, the intense headlights trained on his form against the wall, blinding his eyes as he crouched over. He held up his hands to shield his face and heard the doors burst open, two men coming from behind the cover of the windows, their pistols trained on him. He stiffened and held his hands up in terror, and out of the second van came two others, bold and strong, their faces emotionless and their forms hidden by black coats that swept as far as the ground. Each held in his hand a black wand of metal, and Clarence trembled under their gazes, almost feeling the torturous magic coursing through his body again. The side door of the van opened slowly, and Clarence whimpered, pressing himself against the rocks. All was still as the last man came from the darkness, standing in front of the others. Clarence looked up at him weakly. The man's face was rough, his hair light into his shoulders, power behind his eyes. His clothes were torn and bloody, as were those of the others. Clarence counted them in the light. There were only 5. The police must have caught the rest. "Running away so soon, are we?" the man said in a soft tone that held poison behind it. Clarence only covered his eyes. "Wouldn't stick around to help clean up, would you?" the man said, louder. "Already tired of the project just because the police break in?" "Farfield is over," Clarence managed to hiss, hardly able to breathe. He looked up. "You've already failed, Joris," he choked. "The police are on to all of you. Baslin is dead. His spirit is gone, and Imri will hide her son well enough so you will never bring him back." I like that somebody just did the shh emoticon. That's hilarious. "But you know where she's taking him," Joris said, and Clarence jerked his head away, refusing to speak. Very slowly Joris stepped forward, his form covering the headlights and casting a shadow down upon Clarence. "You know where he is, don't you?" Joris said, his voice unrelenting. Clarence whimpered, shaking his head. No, he wouldn't tell. He would not betray Imri. I don't know where she's taking him," Clarence stammered, fighting against the fear that threatened to consume him. Joris narrowed his eyes disbelievingly. "Well then," he said, "we'll just have to convince you to tell us then, won't we?" "I won't," Clarence whispered. "I can't break my promise. The boy is gone. Farfield is over." Joris gave a dry smile and leaned down so close his whisper was loud in Clarence's ear. "Farfield isn't over yet," he whispered. He hissed. "We're going to find Bran Hambric, and we're going to bring him back." A freezing wind blew across the alley where Imri Hambric had parked her car. Her windows were down and the cold chilled her face, but nothing chilled her more than the sudden feeling of dread that crawled across her skin. chance, she whispered. Something was desperately wrong. He should have been there by now. She glanced into the back seat, and it was the limp body of a small 6-year-old boy, the boy who was her son. Just looking at his face tore a hole through her heart. "I'm sorry," was all she could say. If only it could take back years of mistakes, so that maybe she wouldn't be there, running from all she had done, knowing that if she could have lived a few more weeks, she might see herself turn 27, but knowing in her heart she would not even see the next sunrise. Imri never cried, always the strongest, always pretending to be the strongest, but now as she looked back on her life, she looked down at the child she loved so much. Tears grew in the corners of her eyes. She would never see him again. "I won't let them get you," she whispered. "I promise." But just as that whisper left her lips, she felt a start within her, jerked her gaze up, out the back window. She had sensed something move, a shadow, or rather, the feeling of a shadow, moving her way, watching her. Someone was coming, and Imri knew who it was. I like how emotional you all are. It's very funny watching that in the typed-out emoticons. "She's found me," Imri whispered. She thought she would be safe in Dunce. No mage would follow her in there, none of the police from outside either. But she could feel the woman approaching, and she jerked her eyes back to her son. It was too late to run. She'd have to send him elsewhere. Her senses came like a force, wrenching her around, telling her she couldn't waste another second. She jerked around quickly, searching the floor for something to write on. It was empty, not even a spare receipt or a strip of cloth. She tried her pockets and finally found something, an old scrap from earlier that day, with part of something else still at the bottom. She didn't have time to find anything else and quickly scribbled her note on it. "This is all I have to give you," she whispered, stuffing it into his fist and closing his fingers around it. She knew he wouldn't remember anything. Her magic was strong enough for that. But the least she could give him was the note. She shoved the door open and pulled the boy up to her. Time was running out. He was warm, but she could not hold him, not for a second more. She carried him to the back, the darkness of the alley sweeping over her as she punched the button on the trunk of the car, swinging the lid open. Without hesitating for a moment, she pushed her son down into it. She reached to her neck, touching the string of a necklace that was hidden under her shirt. But before she could take it out, she heard a scrape far behind her, and without another second, she jumped forward, slamming the lid shut. Her skin crawled, and she could hear the woman coming down the alley behind her. Imri's breath was quick as she pulled from deep within, drawing on magic. In her haste, unable to think of anywhere to send him where he would be safe. For the magic, she needed something that came from the destination. A piece of paper, maybe, from the house of someone she knew, or maybe a shirt, and her son would wake up in a department store. But as her senses pulled at her, she didn't have a chance to choose one, and without another second to spare, she flung the magic at the trunk, hoping it would find something to use and send her son anywhere but there. "Sedani Awa!" she gasped out. She couldn't manage another breath before a hand jerked out of the darkness, clutching her by the throat, throwing her backwards to the pavement. Her arm scraped against the hard road as she fell. "You fool!" It was the harsh voice of a woman, and Imri looked up, her back to the ground. She couldn't make out her attacker's form in the dark, but Imri knew who it was. Imri heard the click of a gun, but she didn't flinch, didn't say anything. She just lay there, bleeding. "Lock him in the trunk," the woman said sharply. "You can't hide him from me." She punched the button, and Imri heard the lid pop, sweat forming on her brow. What if it hadn't worked? Imri's heart began to beat faster, but then the woman stopped. "Where is he?" the woman hissed. Imri closed her eyes. He was safe. She heard the lid slam, and Imri looked up again. The woman was standing over her. "Where have you sent him?" the woman hissed, but Imri said nothing. She just looked away towards the bricks of the alley buildings. "You're going to die either way," the woman said with no emotion. "We're going to find him either way. All it is now is a matter of how long it will take." Imri turned again and saw the end of the pistol pointed at her. With no traces of magic, the magic investigation of police wouldn't even notice the case of a woman's death by bullet, even if they found a way into Dunce. The woman gave an evil smile. "Who's the powerful one now?" the woman asked. Imri didn't reply, but slowly, slightly, she forced herself to smile, and the woman shot. It happened in less than a second. Imri choked, and her body dropped, all strength gone in an instant. Then with a mocking, vengeful sneer, the woman pulled the trigger again, and another shot rang out, and Imri felt her cheek strike against the pavement. She slid her fingers on the hard road, struggling to breathe, gripping the black rocks until they stained the ends of her fingers. As she lay there, she heard the woman give a small laugh and saw her legs walking past, leaving her behind to die. The world was all above her, the sky a canopy and the buildings towers all around. A black cloud was slowly drawing over the moon, darkness coming over her like a sheet being pulled across her face. She had known it would end this way, but at least Bran was safe. She felt her strength beginning to fade, her eyes starting to close as death sank over her. But as she lay there, her gaze fell across the street, and sitting there, hidden in the stack of crates, was a little girl. The girl's eyes were stained with tears, her face white and trembling. She was hidden, a thin light of fading moonlight on her face, and she had seen it all. And as the night of April 18th passed, and the morning came to life, a boy named Bran awoke in the city of Dunce. And that was the prologue.